Hello, Duke fans. Welcome into the Duke Blue Devils Insider Podcast, your daily podcast for all things Duke Blue Devils news. Just like every day, we thank you so much for tuning in to the show today to get your latest on the Duke Blue Devils. My name is Hugh Strain, your daily host, as well as beat writer at Duke Blue Devils on SI. Happy to chat with you guys today, as well as every single day about the Blue Devils. If you are listening in on YouTube, make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and turn on post notifications so you never miss when one of our shows comes out. If you're listening on any other audio platform, Spotify, Apple, Believe, whatever it may be, make sure to give us a rating down below. This is our show for Tuesday, August 18th. We are just about 3 weeks away from the Duke football program kicking off its 2026 regular season against Tulane on September 5th at Wallace Wade Stadium. That matchup will be a 3:30 p.m. Eastern time kickoff. But in those next, give or take 3 weeks, there are a lot of decisions that will have to be made by head coach Manny Diaz and his staff. The group has sort of gotten into a groove here in training camp, been in camp for over a week now, as this club prepares for a season with some expectations. Not necessarily expectations, but a season where the Duke program is defending something big for the first time in quite some time. Duke fans, as you all know, Duke is coming off of its first ACC championship since 1989 in 2025, its first outright title since the 1960s. The Blue Devils will enter a season defending the conference crown for the first time in over 30 years. And it feels like not too often where you see a reigning conference champion with such low expectations heading into the following year. But that is unfortunately where this Duke program is. Duke was a big-time victim of the transfer portal this offseason, NFL draft departures as well. Some big-time departures on both sides of the football. Obviously, you lose Darian Mensah. His top three receivers are gone. A lot of defensive pieces are gone. And I thought Manny Diaz and his staff did a pretty solid job replacing a lot of those guys. But as we've talked about on this show leading up to the regular season, practically every single one of them, these newcomers in the form of the transfer portal, practically every single one of them is unproven at the Power 5 level. And a lot of them will be asked to step into pretty major roles in their first seasons in Durham. So there's just so much unknown around the Duke football team right now, and they're going to be pretty hard to gauge until we get through probably a few games in the regular season. It's just really hard to gauge teams that are so new. We've talked about it in the same way with some of Duke's opponents on the basketball court this upcoming season. When teams are made up of a lot of new pieces, they're just really tough to gauge before you actually see them on the football field, and that's what this Blue Devils team is. Now, Manny Diaz has maximized the success in each of his rosters in his first 2 seasons in Durham. He's won 9 games in both of those seasons. Duke has several winnable games on its schedule. It will only play one team ranked in the preseason AP Top 25. That is Miami at number 7. Duke will take on the Hurricanes on November 14th. I apologize, in Coral Gables, meeting Darian Mensah once again. But several winnable games on Duke's schedule. I think there's a real opportunity that Duke can win 8 or 9 games once again, both with the schedule and given Manny Diaz's track record. But one thing we do know is that a lot of things are going to have to go Duke's way. There's so many new pieces. There's so many unproven pieces. Some guys are going to have to step up. Is everyone who's expected to step up going to? No, probably not. But Duke needs guys at so many different positions on the field this season to step up in big-time ways and fill those voids left behind in order for Duke to have any sort of legitimate chance to compete atop the ACC once again. Is Duke realistically going to contend for the ACC title? I think it could be in contention simply based off the schedule alone and just the fact that its ACC slate really is not very difficult. I think there's a chance that Duke can have two losses. I mean, 3, you're probably out of that ACC title conversation, but with 2 losses, you're kind of in that mix. I think there's a chance that if Duke overachieves once again under Manny Diaz, that 2 losses in league play is not that crazy to say. But again, so many things are going to have to go right. There's so many question marks everywhere. So the Blue Devils have been in camp for over a week now, starting to get into a groove, starting to see which guys are making moves, which guys are moving up the depth chart, who's starting to answer that call to step up for this team as we really start to get close here to the 2026 regular season, again, in just about 3 weeks. The Blue Devils did have their first scrimmage recently, where we finally got some quote unquote in-game action, if you want to call it that, from these guys who overperformed, who showed up, who kind of made a name for themselves, and who stood out to this Duke coaching staff as guys who can potentially make that leap in 2026 and be real big-time contributors for this Duke team. So we have several takeaways from the Blue Devils' first scrimmage that we are going to get into with you guys here on the show today. Go over why I think they're important, what I think they mean for the future, what they could mean, and what we can expect going forward for this Blue Devils squad heading into the year. So many things are going to be figured out over the next few weeks. Diaz has already said the secondary battle is wide open. The quarterback battle is wide open. So many different positions still have to be figured out. So we're going to get into a few of these takeaways today, things that I took away from the first scrimmage that could potentially pay dividends later on. First one we're going to talk about is the wide receiver room. The wide receiver room is essentially just one big question mark for the Blue Devils right now. I think after losing his top 3 receivers, Cooper Barkade is gone. He transferred to Miami. Quayshawn Brown transferred to Virginia Tech. Samir Hagans ran out of eligibility. He is now with the Indianapolis Colts, looking to make a career for himself in the NFL. But it's essentially a complete and utter question mark. The 2 guys who are expected to be the top 2 receivers for the Blue Devils this year are Penn transfer Jared Richardson and Charlotte transfer Javon Nicholas. I'm a big fan of Jared Richardson. He easily has the most productive resume of any incoming Duke receiver. Almost 200 catches in his 4-year career with Penn, over 2,500 receiving yards, almost 30 touchdowns. Was one of the best receivers in the Ivy League for consecutive seasons before heading over to Duke. But like most of these transfers, he's completely unproven at the power conference level. But he seems to be generally viewed as the favorite to be Duke's wide receiver 1 this season. Javon Nicholas, again, very unproven, was a walk-on at LSU, played pretty well as a top target for a 1-11 Charlotte team last season, over 700 yards receiving, 60 receptions. But at 5'9", I just don't know what his volume will look like. I think he'll be a really nice deep threat. If he can translate to the ACC, you just don't really know what he's going to look like. But Duke's wide receiver 3 battle feels completely up in the air right now. It feels like 3 young guys, young returners for Duke are kind of in contention to take that spot with Javon Solomon, Jamian Little, and Jaden Moore. But I've got no idea where it's actually going. Jaden Moore was the only of those 3 to have a catch in a game last season. He had 7 catches for 42 yards, I believe, last season. But it was Javon Solomon who in the first scrimmage really, really kind of set himself apart, or at least it looks like it. So in Duke's first scrimmage, Javon Solomon caught 3 passes for 50 yards and 2 touchdowns. The offense as a whole combined for 4 passing touchdowns, 4 receiving touchdowns. Javon Solomon had 2 of them. So he seemed to be a pretty common target. Again, only 3 catches on the day, but obviously very productive with that volume he got. So it seemed like he really put together a really solid scrimmage, kind of set himself apart from the other guys in that mix for the wide receiver 3 role. But it just feels so up in the air right now. I had Javon Solomon in my top 30 players countdown earlier this offseason at number 30, the only of Jaden Moore, Jamie Little, and Javon Solomon to make that list. But it just feels so up in the air right now, the wide receiver spot especially, but the wide receiver room overall. You just don't really know what you're going to get. You think you have a lot of talent, Jared Richardson, at least I do. Javon Nicholas, we'll have to wait and see. He's just totally unproven at a big-time level, was a great receiver for a really bad team last year, but who knows what you're going to get. And then the wide receiver 3 is completely up in the air. Duke had a fantastic passing attack last season. It's been completely decimated by departures. Now you have these new pieces from the mid-major level or guys who didn't really play much last year who are going to try to fill those roles. And it's just so hard to decipher what this actual wide receiver depth chart is going to look like. But it seemed like Javon Solomon really, really stood out today in the scrimmage, and he could potentially be taking a step ahead of a Jaden Moore or a Jamian Little as the young guy who could really push for that wide receiver 3 spot as we move closer here to the regular season. The second is that Bryce Davis really could be poised for a breakout season with the Blue Devils. Now, that's not a scorching hot take. It's probably not even a warm take. I think a lot of Duke fans around the program are very high on Bryce Davis. I think on a national scale, there is still a lot of attention that he will have to earn, but extremely talented player. According to 24/7 Sports, he is the highest rated recruit in Duke football history, really since he entered the program. He's been expected by the Duke fan base. I mean, how can you not expect him to put together a really tremendous career? Served as more reserve as a rookie with the Blue Devils, 10 total tackles for him, along with a pass deflection. But along a completely revamped defensive line, he's going to be a guy who I think will be the leader. Along the defensive ends, probably going to be Tyshawn Reed and Bryce Davis as those ends, and then Preston Watson and Owen Wafel as the two defensive tackles for the Blue Devils. So two former four-star recruits on that defensive line for the Blue Devils with Bryce Davis and with Owen Wafel. But obviously a really talented player, a guy who's expected to show massive improvement in an expanded role for the Blue Devils this upcoming season. In the scrimmage, he had 2 sacks for losses of 7 and 6 yards, respectively. I certainly think a guy like Bryce Davis can be Duke's leading sack getter this season. I think he will be a mainstay on the defensive line. And again, around the Duke fan base, that's not a very hot take at all. Most Duke fans are probably expecting a big time jump from Bryce Davis in 2026. But along a national scale, really, isn't a guy a lot of people know about. And I think he's got the potential to be one of the more productive defensive linemen in the entire ACC, even though he's just a true sophomore. He's a really good athlete. He's got good instincts. Obviously showed it today. He can get to the quarterback. But a guy that I think in an expanded role with Duke in 2026, I think he will be the leader on that defensive line, probably the best D end or D tackle that Duke has. But really excited to see him get to the quarterback this season. He showed, put that on display in the scrimmage today. Again, a guy that most people expect to take a big jump, but seems like he could really, really be poised for a major breakout season on a national scale, really start to gain some attention as a potential future NFL draft prospect. But at least, the most productive front seven piece, if not one of the most productive front seven pieces for this Duke roster. Third takeaway we're going to get in today before we get out of here is Duke's running back room, and it could be very, very deep. There's a pretty good chance Duke's going to have to rely on its run game this season fairly heavily. There's a chance it won't. Again, it kind of goes back to what we said earlier. It's just so hard to decipher what this passing attack is going to look like. You got an unproven quarterback, whether it's Walker Eget or Dan Mahan. It's completely unproven whoever is that starter. And then the wide receiver room is also completely unproven. Duke also lost 2 of its starting tackles, both of its starting tackles, Nick Del Gran from Coastal Carolina and Braden Miller from California, going to fill those voids, but it's just completely unproven. Duke's running back room is not. It got Nate Shepard back, who might be the best running back in college football that no one's heard of. He will be the bell cow. But in the scrimmage, it looked like Duke might have some serious depth in the backfield that not a lot of people have been talking about. We've talked about the rushing attack a bit before the preseason. I certainly think it'll be a strength for Duke just because of the fact that it got one of the best rushers in the ACC back and the fact that the rest of the offense is so unproven. But the depth behind Nate Shepard might be a little more promising than what was originally anticipated. Rutgers transfer CJ Campbell, who we've talked about a couple times. He went for 8 carries with 41 yards. Shepard himself had 8 carries for 37 yards. Yale transfer Billy Dahl. He led the way with 12 carries for 62 yards. And then 3-star rookies Javian Tanelis and CJ Givers tallied 8 carries for 48 yards and 6 carries for 25 yards, respectively. So efficient running by this Blue Devils rushing attack. And it seems like obviously not all these guys are going to play consistently. But with Dahl, Shepard, and Campbell, at least in 2026, and it seems like Duke might have a pretty formidable rushing attack heading into the 2026 campaign, and one that Duke can actually lean on reliably when the passing attack struggles early on. With Nate Shepard, you know what you're going to get. I mean, at the volume he's going to get, I think he can be a top 10 most productive rusher in college football. And then CJ Campbell, he's been productive, was very productive at FAU in 2024, over 800 yards rushing on 165 carries, was one of FAU's top pass catchers as well in that season. We just haven't seen it at the Power 4 level. With Rutgers in 2025, severe ankle injury in Rutgers' 3rd game of the season. So he's out the rest of the year. So it remains to be seen, but was very productive in 2024 with the Owls. And then Billy Dahl, again, you don't really know what you're going to get with him, how many carries he's actually going to get, comes over from Yale. But in terms of the reserves behind Nate Shepherd, it seems a lot more promising than maybe originally anticipated. Maybe even a couple of these rookies like Givers and Tantalus get in. But led by Nate Shepherd, this Duke run game could be very, very effective and one of the better parts of this roster and offensive attack heading into the season. But those are the biggest takeaways we took away from Duke's first scrimmage. Training camp moves along as we get ready for the regular season opener. But that is going to do it for us here today at the Duke Blue Devils Insider Podcast. Just like every day, we thank you so much for tuning into the show today. Make sure to check us out every single day at si.com/college/Duke, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, my name is Hugh Strain, your daily host, as well as beat writer at Duke Blue Devils on SI, and I'll see you tomorrow.